Good evening and welcome to Salon 6, a production of One Week Critique, a nonprofit digital editing studio which aims to provide literary education and pedagogical support to writers, whatever genre they are operating in, whatever their level of formal education, and regardless of the means by which they have found themselves compelled towards the literary arts. I'm Jon Riccio, joined tonight by our featured readers, Kate Bernheimer and Aimee Bender, as well as One Week Critique's founding editors, Matthew Schmidt and Adam Alsergani, and all of you. Thank you for being in attendance. As a quick reminder, please make sure you're muted while our artists have the floor. And we hope you'll stick around after Kate and Aimee's reading for a brief question and answer session regarding their creative approaches. When I think of One Week Critique, I think of us as a backyard for anyone who calls themselves a writer. Thinking of backyards, I remember how Adam hosted readings at his house when he, Matthew, and I lived in Arizona. Grad students gathered around his pseudo gazebo and pool. Then I think of the fact that once upon a PhD, Matthew and I lived in the same apartment complex. So it was a given that we'd cross shared backyards during our hangouts, where we'd talk poetry, often followed by movies ranging from Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, to that misunderstood genius Carrot Top's outing chairman of the board. To which I add, please don't hold the latter half of my film aesthetics against me. I still get flack for making Matthew watch chairman of the board to this day. But if you haven't seen it, go see it and see what I'm talking about with the genius part. One Week Critique came about because of a writing community, and it exists to create writing communities, whether through in-person partnerships with the Iowa City Public Library or online, such as tonight's salon, or any of our various interviews and craft talks with fellow writers that are on our YouTube channel. Thank you again, everyone, for coming to our backyard this evening. I'm thrilled to introduce our first reader. Kate Bernheimer is a literary author and fairy tale scholar. Her novel, The Lion's Den, is forthcoming from Little Brown. Among her dozen books are the World Fantasy Award-winning collection, My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me, 40 New Fairy Tales, and X.O. Orpheus, 50 New Myths. These anthologies, for which she had the honor of working with and learning from Aimee Bender on two brilliant stories, in addition to a novella co-authored with Laird Hunt, Office at Night. Her books have been translated into Catalan, Chinese, Greek, French, Korean, Italian, Spanish, Turkish, and other languages. Her fairy tale scholarship is forthcoming in the third edition of The Classic Fairy Tales, a Norton critical edition, edited by Maria Tatar. She is founding editor of the literary journal Fairy Tale Review, published in the Donald Hass series in fairy tales through Wayne State University Press. Recent essays and stories have appeared in the Iowa Review, the Hopkins Review, Orion Magazine, Plowshares, the Adroit Journal, and Spacecraft Projects. Her first poem to be published since junior high is forthcoming in Prairie Schooner. And then in little parentheses in the bio, it says, never give up on the dream. With her brother, architect Andrew Bernheimer, she co-curates and writes introductions to fairy tale architecture, a long-running series of designs for environmental, public, and domestic spaces for Places Journal. Without further ado, here is Kate.
Thank you so much, Jon, for that lovely introduction, and to everyone at this salon this evening, and to your salon series and When We Critique, for all you do to amplify writers at all stages. And we're all at all stages at all times. So it's phenomenal what you do to create community. And it's so exciting, nerve-wracking, and awe-inspiring to be reading with one of my favorite authors of all time, Aimee Bender, with whom I've gotten to work on several works several stories, and it's just you can see I'm tongue-tied here. To break the ice, and I think we both read for 15 minutes, and I timed this, and this should be exactly 15 minutes, even though when I say, and there's just one more story, it's like 3 sentences long. So the last one. I thought I would break the ice with a Grimm's fairy tale just to get us in the mood here. And this is called Friendly Animals 1 and 2. A little orphan girl sat spinning at the foot of the ramparts when suddenly a grass snake crawled out of a crack in the wall. Quickly, she spread out her blue kerchief beside her, the kind that snakes love to sit on. When the snake saw that, it turned around and vanished, but soon came back carrying a tiny gold crown, put the crown on the kerchief, and went away. The little girl picked up the glittering crown, which was made of finely spun gold. After a while, the snake came a second time. When it saw that the crown wasn't there anymore, it crept back to the wall. Stricken with grief, it beat its head against the stone as long as its strength held out and finally lay there dead. If the little girl had left the crown lying on the kerchief, the snake would probably have brought her more treasures from its hole. 2. Toad cries, hoo hoo. Child says, come on out. The toad comes out and the child asks about her little sister. Have you seen red stockings? Toad says, no, not I, no more than you. Hoo hoo, hoo hoo, hoo hoo. So thank you, Brothers Grimm, for getting us in the mood there, soon to be adapted by Disney or Pixar or somebody. Be great, actually. I'd like to thank the editors of the Iowa Review for kindly publishing this next story, which all of these stories I'll read are part of a collection called My Professional Annas, and they're all narrated by a performance artist named Anna who plays drums while doing ballet. But you wouldn't know from these. So anyway, thanks to the Iowa Review for publishing Girls Riding on Horses on Cliffs by the Ocean or Sea. There were girls on horses riding the horses in a field toward the ocean or sea, galloping there. Many girls were on horses. I don't know how many there were or where they were coming from, but there were so many of them, and they were coming from the distance from where the sun was setting. They were heading east toward the ocean or sea. It felt like sunset at the sand beach, though this wasn't the sand beach. The sand beach is not east of sunset. East of sunset is the shell beach. The girls rode their horses across a vast open field of gold grass, winter season grass, not unlike the lawn in front of the mansion, though the setting was more foreign, more exotic, and this wasn't there, and the mansion lawn faces east toward the New Bedford Harbor, and the girls on horses were riding into the east toward the ocean and not toward a harbor. The water was choppy and deep, sort of deep green brown, the color it sometimes gets in certain light, nearly hazel, like my mother's eyes are. It swirled with little waves and some sharper waves and also larger waves that were dark. It was dusk and mainly cloudy with some dim light but darkening out. The light was tan and yellow, the clouds are gray, and it was very pretty. And it was hushed. It was hushed. The girls wore long skirts, and the girls were handsomely clothed, not garishly, but dramatically. Old-fashioned, dashing outfits, feminine and hearty. And while this was real life, that is, the girls were not yet in a performance, their outfits were costumes. The costumes were in pleasing hues, earthy and deep. The costumes were highly well made of heavy, rich textiles. Some of them had blouson sleeves, others were simpler, all were long, buttoned down. Some with high collars, some with big bows at the necks, some under leather or brown vests that had brown stitching, and all had been very well sewn. The girls wore high, strong leather boots under the long skirts. Some skirts were tiered. The girls wore muslin slips under the skirts, maybe breeches or pantaloons. These were underneath the slips and the skirts. Some were on saddles, and they were all holding ropes, and it is possible some were on bareback. They drove the horses to go fast, cantering forward or galloping, whichever's faster. It was like a race, but they weren't competing with each other, though they were driven. They headed toward dark, jagged cliffs by the ocean or sea. Some took their horses up and down the cliffs, and the cliffs led to more cliffs, and then to lower cliffs, and then sandbars, and then more cliffs out in the water. These were outcroppings, and the horses were running up and down the cliffs and outcroppings, and it was very dangerous, but the girls were succeeding, but it was very dangerous. I said to no one, because no one was there, "They're not trained for that," a few times. I said to no one, as no one was there, "I don't think they should be doing that." I didn't know what was going to happen at the last cliff or outcropping in the water, and I was concerned for the horses because something would happen. They struggled and worked very hard, with the sun shining on them, even though it was dusk, and I could see into their eyes, which communicated they were working so hard. The girls never fell off the horses. The girls were totally balanced. I could see each one struggling as she did it. That is, the horse. I was not one of the horse riders. I was a spectator. I stood in the field. I watched the horses and girls until I was designated to, or I was propelled to, or I was to and did. It happened that I was to and did become the last girl to trot down to the beach, where I was to join a long line of younger girls who wore black leotards with short sleeves, a long line of girls in black leotards who'd been doing nice, gentle, old-fashioned petit jetés across the field. This line of ballerinas followed after the girls, while the horse rode up and down the jagged cliffs and outcroppings. This was the second scene, but this was not a performance. It was rehearsal. And the girls jetéed right past me. They were graceful and all had good lift, and then they jetéed across a sandbar that was between the first cliff and the lower cliffs and outcroppings that were in the ocean or sea. I joined the line of girls in black leotards when they were down on the sandbar and began to jeté and said to one, or maybe the last girl, "I was not good at jetés. I never got enough elevation." I was older than the girls doing jetés. They were doing old-fashioned jetés, the cloud-like arced ones that are no longer in fashion. I didn't get much elevation, but I kept going forward. The girls in black leotards with short sleeves, which I also was wearing, were young, 9 to 11 or 12 maybe, and the girls on horses were older, teenagers. I wasn't any of those ages. There were a lot of both kinds of girls. I didn't count them as they were all moving too fast, and there were so many of them. I couldn't tell how many there were, but I wanted to tell the number. No one was there. And this story I'll read next is called Eagle Swallowing Girl. And I'd like to thank the editors of the Adroit Journal for kindly publishing this during the pandemic. And they have such beautiful design production too on that website. Eagle Swallowing Girl. I went out to my carport. A man stood in the gravel beside a white pickup truck. He told me he was there to fix the truck on my windshield. I hadn't called him to do this, so I was surprised. He said he wanted to do it between the hours of X and Y, which was a 1 hour time slot, something to do with it being Friday and tomorrow was Saturday, and thus and therefore, he repeated, "Tomorrow's Saturday, man," like somehow not repairing my windshield on Friday between the hours of X and Y had something to do with tomorrow being Saturday. I consented, though I was confused. Still, I remained cheerful in the face of it. "Oh, yes, yes, tomorrow's going to be Saturday, that's for sure." I noticed something in the sky, an enormous eagle, way bigger than eagles are in real life. I told the mechanic, "That's an eagle." I began a conversation with him about how the eagle was a national symbol. Soon I became insecure that the eagle was a national symbol. I pointed to where the eagle was perched on top of the pine tree in my backyard. "There's usually an owl on the tree, where the eagle now is," I remarked. This was and was not untrue. Sometimes an owl was there, but not usually. The eagle was bigger than a truck, yet the pine tree did not show any sign of distress. The pine tree was very upright. It held at least 3 nests of which I was aware: hummingbird, mourning dove, goldfinch. The eagle took off in a beautiful angle of flight. It quickly swooped down, Now it was on the hunt for a hawk who was usually above my house in the sky or in a telephone pole. The hawk headed from west to east. The eagle kept swooping toward it. I said, I didn't know eagles ate hawks. The repairman showed no sign of curiosity. Well, I saw that the way the eagle would eat the hawk was that it would swallow it whole, as a snake swallows a mouse. That said, there is a snake living under my yard shed, and I've never seen it eat anything. The rabbits, which live under the yard shed with her, sit and stare at the snake whenever she comes out to sun herself on the concrete, which is rarely. She shows no interest in them. The rabbits have a puzzled expression as they look at the snake. Sometimes they seem to exchange glances with one another. It is possible the snake isn't normal in some way, but who wants to be normal? I stood on the hot gravel and wrung my hands, remembering the repairman was there. We watched as the eagle headed up into the sky and then dove for the hawk over and over again. The hawk seemed entirely unaware of the eagle. I wanted to know whether eagles were hawks, and I thought to pose this question to the hawk herself because the repairman clearly would be of no assistance. But the hawk disappeared. In her place, but not having transformed from the hawk, there was now a girl in the sky. I had the thought, she looks like a pencil, though she's life size. I chose not to tell the repairman about this thought, for although he'd only revealed zero interest in my commentary so far, I suspected his disinterest could quickly turn into something more difficult for me if I gave him reason to take any notice. The girl in the sky flew with her arms by her sides and her legs together, so she made a tidy line through the air, angled with her head tilted slightly to the west and up toward the moon as it rose. The eagle was now hunting her, I recognized. At this point, he was enormous. Yes, I know. He already was described as the size of a truck. Yet now he was the size of something larger than a pickup truck, which is what I had in mind when I said the size of a truck. The eagle was the size of a garbage truck now. He was going to swallow the girl whole. I realized girls and eagles were both protected. Or were they? I wondered. Surely both were. This would not be a good question to pose to the repairman, who'd made no motions toward repairing my windshield, but was just leaning on my white stucco wall in white overalls, smoking a white cigarette. Puffs of smoke rose past the brim of a white baseball cap. There was a patch on the baseball cap. The patch read, I heart intercourse. Up in the fine blue sky, the eagle continued to dive toward the girl with his beak open, but he continued to miss the girl every time. This was unlikely, for she was making herself as easy to swallow as could be imagined up there in a straight, angled line, fresh for the taking. It should be no surprise that I realized the eagle was going to hunt for me next. I tried to hide under the car, but I couldn't get all the way under it. The eagle was going to swallow me whole. The repairman stood there in silence, watching the sky. And then I'll just read one last one. I've never I've never done that when I read that one out loud. I've only read that one out loud once before, but I hope that came across right. My daughter's always telling me I do that wrong. So this story, thanks to the Iowa Review, which published it in a series of 5 tales. This is called Diamond, and it's also part of My Professional Annas, so the same performance artist narrates it. Barbara Streisand lounged in a decadent bed, ivory silk sheets, white eiderdown comforter, cream-colored satin headboard. She had a nice bouffant updo and wore a cream-colored peignoir. She held a pretty diamond between 2 elegant fingers up to the light of a sparkling and bright chandelier. She stared at the diamond intently. I was 15. I sat across from her, watching her do this. Barbara Streisand said, there's something about diamond, the jewel, the object, the word, I said. The word. She agreed. She looked happy. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. We can all unmute ourselves and give round thunderous applause if you want.
Woohoo!
Yay!
Good.
Awesome.
Yay.
We had jetés, we had pantalones, we had weekend windshields, which would have totally been my rock band in the 90s if I had gone that route instead of viola. And then we had Barbra Streisand. Can the night get any better? I mean, I'm so thrilled, Kate, that you were able to join us. And then we've got Aimee coming up during the second part of the salon. And again, thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to actually turn it over now to Adam. He'll have a few words to say in the quasi intermission.
Cool. Welcome to the Quasi Intermission. I'm Adam Al-Sergani. I'm the executive director of One Week Critique. As Jon told everyone at the top, we're an Iowa-based uh, arts nonprofit, and we provide educational resources and editorial support to students and teachers of the literary arts. We are an entirely volunteer run program. Shout out to Jon Riccio, who has organized this salon, as well as does a ton of other work for One Week Critique out of the goodness of his heart. I wanted to briefly tell you about a few of the other things that we do. And then, of course, pitch you as any good nonprofit would on donating to us rather than giving your money to the government in other ways, which should the government ask in a audit of our nonprofit, please note that I said it that way. Cool. So, yeah, we provide primarily online resources. That's how we started out. One Week Critique was an idea of the lovely and talented but currently off-camera Matthew Schmidt, of doing a project where editorially um, uh, we would take a short piece of prose or a poem and give editorial feedback within 7 days or less. From there, we were a pandemic project. We got a lot of good attention, positive attention from folks who were interested in exploring the arts, who couldn't make their ways into MFAs, who had left MFAs and wanted some work, who just wanted to experiment with writing. And we started to provide a series of other activities and resources, including the interview series, where writers provide a piece of early work and then published or finished work. You can find PDFs of those online for your own research, the research of your students, as to how those pieces develop, as well as the interviews with those authors about how that development took place, appreciations with which Matthew runs, which is an interview series with editors of literary magazines, appreciating the work of other literary magazines that they dig, interpretations, which is a undergraduate publication venue for academic literary work, as well as the salon readings. Jon also does what he calls teaching takeaways, which are lesson plans on a single poem, which are available online. Story Talk, which has been in a short story discussion with Matthew Schmidt, Ingrid Wensler, and I, and Matthew Schmidt's kicking it back off in the near future. I think we actually did one of Aimee's pieces on there back in the day, but it's been a while. And we also do some community work in Iowa City with the Iowa City Public Library. We provide weekly workshops to teens every Thursday at 4 p.m. As a collaboration with their teen space. They've started their own journal called This is Flammable, which is available through the ICPL website. I tell you all that to tell you those resources are available to you. They're available to your students. And we hope that you use them. That's why we provide them. And I also say that to say that our volunteers do a great deal of work to help provide those resources and make them available to the world. So if you ever feel compelled, you are more than welcome to reach out online or through the website and donate, and avoid whatever taxes you don't want to pay. That's more than enough out of me. So I'm going to hop off and turn it back over to Jon, who I believe is going to introduce the indomitable Aimee Bender.
That I will. Thank you, Adam. And just a very brief plug, when we talked about the interview series, I believe maybe the second week of March, our next installment will be available online, and it features Anka Silagi, who was in the audience tonight. And Anka and I had a wonderful conversation about her novel Dreams Under Glass, which is laden with arts and Joseph Cornell as fairy godfather and New York City at the height of the financial meltdown in 2008. And it was a thrilling book that I got to read and just have a great literary discussion. Our second reader, Aimee Bender, is the author of 6 books of fiction, including the bestseller, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, and The Color Master, listed as a New York Times notable book. Her short fiction has been published widely in places like Granta, the Paris Review, McSweeney's, and more, as well as heard on This American Life and Selected Shorts, and in 2 of Kate Bernheimer's anthologies, where Kate's encouragement and editorial work was an immense help. Her writing has been translated into 16 languages, and she teaches creative writing at USC, where she's currently also director of the PhD in Creative Writing and Literature program. She lives in LA with her family. Welcome, Aimee.
Thank you so much. It's so cool to hear what you're doing. I feel so glad to know about it, about When We Critique and all the programs that you're offering. It just sounds incredible, and it's just a great resource, and I will pass the word along. So I'm just happy to be here, and it's totally a joy to read with Kate, who I just love. And I'm so happy you're going to be in the classic fairy tales, because I feel like you've been an absence in that book, and I feel so glad. And I loved hearing your stories. They were wonderful. And that line pained me about the protected eagle and the protected woman, girl. Anyway, it was right to the heart. It was really good. So thank you. It's nice to see you all. I'm going to read kind of a little portion of story that's about to come out in the Fairy Tale Review. That's like a continuation of this fairy tale world that I've been having fun working on. There's a quote that I always turns out I'm misquoting from Norton Juster, who wrote The Phantom Tollbooth, but it was that the real work happens when you're playing hooky from what you think is the real work. And this has been me sort of having fun on the side from not writing the novel that I'm also writing. And in fact, I'm having a little, so who knows? Who knows what will actually complete first? Unclear. But thank you so much for having me. And so this will be coming out in the next Fairy Tale Review. And it's called The Oracle and the Guard. And it's just the world of a kingdom. I think it should hold. I think it should be self-explanatory. There's some information in a previous story, but I think it's clear enough. Okay. The Oracle lived in a large apartment with 7 other employees of the kingdom. She was the only Oracle, although there was also a psychic, and they had never really talked about who covered what, if there might be too much overlap. The Oracle said she was about prediction, big or small. That's what she told others, but really she was most interested in the intimate internal. Her talent was reading people and telling them what they were already emitting. The psychic did mention once helpfully on a stroll through a neglected farm to collect wild herbs in a wicker basket that she was especially into the larger prophecies, the storms of change. She, the psychic, also used props. She had an actual crystal ball on a shelf blown by a local glassmaker, cotton satchels stuffed with those same herbs dried, and rows of books on the intricacies of the palm. The remaining 5 housemates were a range of smiths: blacksmith, silversmith, goldsmith, and 2 cobblers. Back in the other kingdom, the Oracle had been a barmaid, but she'd told a few customers their fates by watching eye movements and nervous gestures, fates validated weeks later by repeat visits to the bar and amazed shakings of her hand. So on the long and painful walk to the new kingdom in her busted sandals, she had invented the position for herself through 2 full days of rocky fields and deserted towns and a fitful night asleep under a leafless tree, her skin lanced by cutting winds, resolve arriving with the sunrise. She entered the tall gates of the new kingdom, and right away she found this apartment with the psychic and the cobblers and declared herself the king's oracle before she even had the job. It was quite clever, really. She cleaned herself up, paid the rent and security deposit with her last wages, and went straight to the castle lobby. I've seen the job in my future, she said. When can I speak to the king? The duo of protective butlers at the front of the castle had laughed in her face. The king doesn't just see people, they said. You have to make an appointment. It will take at least 6 months. One of the butlers reached to a shelf to bring out a portable calendar and rifle through the weeks. The oracle waited, and as she did, she siphoned strength from the memory of her dead grandmother, who had been the person she most admired, a woman who laughed so loud with guests in her kitchen that passers-by would knock on the door and ask to be let in on the joke. Her dead grandmother had also left her own town in disgrace due to running a school that taught children about voting. Well, the oracle said to the butlers, the greeters, summoning her grandmother's booming voice beneath her own, what I envisioned was today, and I follow what I see. Today, before noon, I need to speak to the king and tell him what I advise as his oracle. The king has no oracle, said the businesslike woman in the well-fitted tweed, her index finger marking a page in the calendar book. He is a practical man. He does now, said the oracle. I saw it in a vision. The 2 butlers, one tall, one short, shook their heads at each other. You should ask him, said the oracle loftily. I can imagine he might be upset if you stood in the way of his destiny. She didn't have her grandmother's boisterous laugh or square shoulders or aggressively floral dresses, but she had a kind of natural haughty air, and she had seduced the guard's wife by simply taking her hand one day and with eye contact, beseeching, bringing her to a side room. Okay, she had said, moving her hand to the woman's cheek. The woman had nodded. Okay, she said, kissing the cheek. She could feel the woman trembling. Good tremble, she asked, moving closer, slowly to her mouth. Good, the woman had murmured, slipping out of her blouse unasked. So she had it in her to lead. She stared down the woman in the tweed suit. When she didn't make much headway, she rotated her glare and aimed it at the tall young man with the heavy eyebrows. I have a good track record with my visions, she told him. 2 predicted deaths, a pregnancy, 4 love affairs, a visitor from far away. To be honest, it's you who I relate to the most, employees. I have no interest in putting your jobs in jeopardy. He, young, long-faced, new to the castle, had an ill mother at home who required medicine to regulate her heartbeat, and he needed the job very badly to afford it, and he said he supposed it wouldn't hurt to check. The woman in tweed scowled. Our king believes in science, she said. He's seeing the lead physicist next week to discuss the ways of the atom, but even that has to wait. Just in case, the tall butler said to the oracle, who was struggling to suppress a smile. He did tell me yesterday to ask if I had any questions. The king wanted his staff to feel welcome. His father, the previous king, had been an unkind leader, harsh, unjust, often rude to employees. It had always pained the young prince tagging along, watching their faces and hearing their mutters after his father stepped away. The tall young man went down a hall and after about 20 minutes returned to the front of the castle where the oracle was standing observing a tapestry of a unicorn and a young girl in a robe in a meadow staring at the viewer with limpid eyes. He says, sure, why not, said the young man. He has time in about 20 minutes. I'm supposed to be there as a guard in case you are bad. He stumbled over his words. I mean, not bad, just in case. Of course, said the oracle, curtsying, her heart pouring over itself inside her chest. She nodded at the woman in tweed, whose face had puckered into sourness. Thank you for your time, said the oracle with a tone so empty of I told you so that the words rang even louder. The tall guard walked her through the corridors and pathways that the tailor would later see on his own entry to the castle. The oracle found it all very weighty. The kingdom she had left had been more modern in its architectural leanings, used glass and light metals, open spaces. This kingdom really went for the old visions from the history books, had large fireplaces, animal skin rugs, cleaners and aprons holding wooden buckets, straw strewn on the floor, donkeys wandering around outside. She saw nothing made of plastic, even though plastic had really cut costs elsewhere. She even passed a wooden sign that said, "Reminder, no plastic," in an elegant fire-burned cursive. She noticed little technology that required electricity either. The chandeliers held long, tapered, dripping candles, and there were actual blazing torches in the halls. In fact, her rent, she realized, was lower than in the previous kingdom because the apartment had no refrigerator. When her new housemate had referenced an icebox, it was literal. She laughed to herself, and the young man turned around as if there was something sticking to his butt. "You're fine," she said, waving a hand. "Do you use any electricity here at all?" "Only in the hospital," he said, "which is fully stocked, and the royal kitchen, including the deep freezer. Otherwise, no, we do not believe in all the amenities." "Interesting," she said. "One might not call a light bulb an amenity." "Beats me," he said. "King's law." They arrived at a large oak door with a pig's head as its knocker. The young man checked his watch and knocked. "Come in," boomed the king. "No, wait." He came to the door and opened it. He glanced back and forth at the two of them. There was a tiny spot of milk in his mustache. "Let's go to my conference room," he said. "More official." He stepped forward in his ermine robe and led the way to a small room down the hall with a window overlooking a courtyard where people were sitting and drinking coffee and tea and reading at mesh metal tables. "It's reading hour," he said, "part of the job requirement." "How lovely," said the oracle. "Milk," she pointed. The king laughed, brushed at his face. The young man didn't sit, but stood to the side. The oracle leaned in. "Our conversation may be of a more personal nature," she said. "I understand why he's here, but is it fine if he hears things?" The king appraised her. He had a solid, friendly face. He wasn't smiling, but the natural formation of his features was warm. "Isn't it up to you?" she said. He said. "Well," she said, "what I mean is personal to you, not to me." "Aha," said the king. He turned. "To me? Interesting. Guard?" The young man angled his head closer. "Would you consider yourself a curious person?" "Me?" said the young man, thinking. "No, not especially." "Perfect," said the king. "Don't bother listening." "Sure thing," said the young man. The king returned his gaze to her. "Voila," he said. "Proceed." "And you believe him?" she asked. "I do." She shifted in her chair, moved her bracelets far up her arms so they wouldn't clank against the table. She told him she was new to town, to his kingdom, and had seen a vision just the day before that she was to be his royal oracle. It was the only lie she would tell him, she said to herself as she spoke. She had never been an oracle before, she added, but had long been praised for her ability to tell people about their futures. "It's a natural skill," she said, "and you know what they say, do what you're good at. I saw the vision, and so I'm here for my job." She kept her gaze steady on him. He chuckled. "A bold one you are," he said, folding his hands in his lap. "Well, show me then. Tell me about me." She cleared her throat. Dead grandmother inside her. "You like people," she said slowly. "You trust them." "Sure," he said, "but that's easy," indicating the young man who was staring at the wall, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. "You're not your father's son," she said, straightening her back, looking closer. She thought she could see his mother in how he held his face. One can see, she believed, the dominant parent in a person's face. You could sense a ghost imprint of that parent in how they spoke or moved their features. The king raised his eyebrows. "I sure hope not." "But not fully aligned with your mother either," she said, peering in. At the bar, when she'd been the barmaid, she noticed this too. Some people had a full mother or a full father on their faces, and others had more of one, but it wasn't as dominant. It was probably like her with her grandmother, influence extending beyond the nuclear family core. The king's face seemed to indicate a woman, his mother, but others as well, others she did not know how to name. "Go on," he said. "You are lonely," she said, smiling at him gently. "No," he said, but he looked away out the window. "There's so much to do." "Busy, yes, but also lonely. One can be both, a stone in a brook. It's interesting you haven't picked a wife," she said. "You're of age. You're attractive." The king was watching her, assessing him. He did not seem afraid of her. She was finding she liked him, not in any romantic or sexual sense, but she liked his manner, how he held himself. He was, it seemed, at least in first impression, a trustworthy person, one who dealt in trust, both giving and accepting it. He was not hiding. If he hadn't fully expressed himself in his life, it was not due to a lack of knowing or to wily secrets. She felt then the job. It would be hers. The vision she had lied about becoming real as she spoke. She told him all she felt about him right then, his manner, what it indicated. "Thank you," he said. "Those are significant compliments." "I hope you will allow yourself some connections to others," she said, "in intimate ways, in physical ways. It must be difficult as a king, but if you reach out, I think you will find others who can reach back, who don't have agendas or are out for power grabs. And I'm not hitting on you, please. You should know I was fired from my last job because I seduced a guard's wife, but I don't intend to do that again. Just that's why I have no reference letters. They sent me away. The king was looking out the window again, watching his employees turning pages of their books, sipping their tea. He also had a sports break scheduled later in the day. He believed in making a workplace enjoyable, using his kingly doctrines to help people's lives. So much time was wasted at workplaces anyway, might as well waste it well. I believe we're out of time, he said. So what do you imagine, weekly? She felt like crying. Sometimes luck just lined up. Weekly works, she said. And of course, as needed, middle of the night, if need be. I know you're not seeing the future, the king said, standing, ruffling his mustache for any more debris. I know you're just a very insightful person, but that is still a worthy choice for one's cabinet. 2 gold pieces a month? 3, she said. He laughed. 2.5. She bowed a little. The young man in the corner had perked up at the end there, refocused his gaze. It seemed only at the mention of money did his curiosity emerge. The oracle and the king shook hands. See you next week then, she said, Tuesday morning. Tell Vantala to pay you now, he said, so you can settle in, buy yourself an oracle uniform, whatever that is. You need to look more mysterious than you do now. Get some better sandals. Guard, make sure she's paid today. And you too. You're promoted. What's your title? Greeter, the young man said, his voice rough with hope. The money had been stretched so far already. He and his ill mother were sharing one plate at dinner, and he had scissored the blanket into 2 inadequate rectangles, so if a person moved during sleep, they would feel a rush of cold. You are now incurious one. Same salary as the oracle. I could use a good guard like you, someone who can be in the room without imposing. The guard and the oracle walked to the front in silence. That she had positively impacted his fate was especially pleasing to her. She thought again of the night she had spent under the tree with that terrible cutting wind, and how now 2 days later she had a job and a boss who didn't seem to be awful, and a young man who was wiping his eye from some relief she could not guess. Thank you for trusting me, she said to the guard as they said their goodbyes. He was telling Vantala the latest, and she looked ready to knife them both. Will my mother live? He whispered to her as she approached the enormous door, gold pieces in hand, given to her in a small dark blue velveteen bag with dripping resentment from Vantala's side room safe. The oracle stood with the weight of the question by that unicorn and its damp eyes. Oh, she said tightly, well, I'm only the king's oracle, you know. The words were so empty, and she hated herself even as she was buoyed by the feel of the coins in her hand. I don't know. You can't? I can't, she said. It's a strange power, only landing on one. He nodded. She's lucky to have you, that I do know, she said. Vantala watched them with narrowed eyes from her position as head greeter. This was not the first time someone had been promoted in advance of her seniority. She was very by the book as an employee. True, she knew that, and one would think that might have helped her, but it hadn't. She did not believe in taking chances like the boy had, and could imagine a wholly different outcome to what had happened that day. She aimed her withering gaze at the oracle. See you next week, the oracle said, waving to them both. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you, Aimee. We can all unmute. More thunderous applause, ovations. Wonderful. We had curtsying oracles, we had ermine robes, reading hours, and pigs had doors. And this was the world building, and I definitely want to get that psychic into my future. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we have the opportunity to turn it over to you in the audience with any type of questions you'd like to ask Kate and Aimee. And I'm sure Matthew, Adam, and I have a few questions, but we always want to get as many other voices joining the conversation as possible. So I will turn it over to all of you.
I have a kind of warm-up question that I hope isn't too broad, but years and years ago, I had the pleasure of having Kate in a class where she introduced the idea that Raymond Carver's Fat was a fairy tale. And I was kind of thrown back to that today. Listening to both of you, I think Kate's work, making the really interesting choice of using a lot of the first person, and um, which uh, many of us probably don't think of as sort of fairy tale voice. And Aimee, I think not only tonight's work, but in so much of your work, there's this incredible navigation of sort of the arcane and the the contemporary, especially um, in the dialogue. And I wondered if the two of you could speak briefly to how you approach and navigate that that kind of interweaving of what we think of as sort of mythos or fairy tale and contemporary moments in aspects like speech or structure.
Happy to have you go. Do you have a thought?
We're such a standoff. We're like,
I know we are.
no, you, no, you.
We're like at the four-way stop.
I mean, that's right. On a one-way street. I mean, fairy tales, of course, have their origins, like all storytelling does, in the storyteller, in orality. So there is, even in those, so-called traditional like book fairy tales, and that's where fairy tales come from, book tales. There is like the vestige of the orality because they were once upon a time told by the fire to keep people awake through the night because someone had to be awake or bad things might happen. But so the storyteller is sort of always hovering there. And I guess I don't decide before I write something what I'm going to do with any of the body of work with which I operate as a scholar and as a reader, first and foremost. I sort of see what comes and then I try to decide what to do with it. So I just spent 8 years on like a third person omniscient novel. And then these stories were kind of written during that time as a really different, like, I don't know how to say this word, oniric excursion where fairy tales come in, almost like the stories are sort of churned through like this set, like stage set of fairy tales. But I also like to just remind anybody, like, as you know so well, I think 'cause I remember talking about it in that class with Raymond Carver, which is that fairy tales are always contemporary to someone. So what we think of as like an old fairy tale was once a news story. And that sort of juxtaposition of the old, the new, and the as yet unforeseen is kind of always churning about, whether one is writing what one considers realism or something else. So that's kind of not a very good answer to what you asked, but I think that those interruptions of the first person in these stories, or like the engine of the first person when it comes up, I didn't know how that was going to operate across like a whole body of them until I had them. And now, of course, I have to go back and retrofit it and make it do something I might not mind showing people, even once something is published. You go back and you're like, oh, now I see what I did, or maybe could have done, or something. But what I love so much in Aimee's work, from your first book to these and I shouldn't talk too much about the Oracle series because I've had a sneak peek of the next installation, so I don't want to like do any any spoilers. But oh, it's so amazing. But from your very first book, you did this really special thing, and it's so consistent and like so the current of your work is so moving and also funny. And like you really feel like you're at the hearthside of like a storyteller. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that too, in response to Adam's amazing question. So
Thank you. Thank you. So nice to hear. And it's a very relevant question because I'm teaching a grad class right now on the writing novels, and it doesn't matter if it's novels or stories, but I brought in this idea that I learned in my MFA and I didn't know how it would land, and they really responded to it. And it was this teacher of mine, Judith Grossman, who was a total fairy tale fan and like a very influential teacher for me. And she split language as being mythic and public. Those were her terms that she used to kind of capture what you're saying. And the mythic was a sort of timeless language, like of the world of myth, castles, tales, whatever. And then public was very much like 2026, Labubu or whatever, like, and then we make a sort of line on the board and we try to put language, where does it fit? Because there's certain things like Hollywood that's like really moving towards myth, but also it's a more recent myth. But like the word Hollywood has that kind of, it's not a public word anymore, even though I drive by the sign all the time. Kardashian, like where do you put her? Where do you put the name of a certain tree, an oak tree versus another tree, like where does language sort of fall? And I think then the language ends up informing the tone. And I think one thing that was so liberating for me was to realize how much could be put inside mythic language, that I didn't have to name all the characters if I didn't want to, that it was such a relief to take away a name and give them a kind of type if that's what it felt right. And then to feel same with, like, it can be in a timeless period, but then there can be some reference to something that puts it in contemporary life. And that is the sort of interplay and tension of textures. So it was just fun to talk about. So I really do think it's a great question from you, Adam, because it ends up informing the tone completely. And I think most books are, and most stories are a combination of both. And it's the proportion that is the thing. Like if we were to look at the Raymond Carver story, we could probably isolate, where is the language drift into something more contemporary and when is it living in myth? And so much of his writing is kind of in a mythic space.
Yeah, I think you really got nailed something there. I mean, that has to do with the idiom that a
Yeah.
writer, the idiom of a writer, and you do it as yourself, regardless. Like, there's not really like this sort of recipe for it that one could follow, but it's like fairy tales themselves are a kind of language, but the writer turns it into public speech by trying to, bring it to life and communicate it to somebody. But yeah, the idiom can go really far in like the futuristic direction, or it can get really bare and iconic, or if
Yeah,
that's the right word. It's really
exactly.
interesting to think about. It's a really good question, Adam.
Yeah.
I wrote a whole lecture that I gave somewhere on Raymond Carver as an author of fairy tales, and I can find no evidence of it, like on any floppy disk, and it was before the internet. So like,
Oh.
um, I can't find any evidence of it, but I'm glad it's cool that you remember that. Maybe you have a scribble in a notebook somewhere.
Yeah, I'll let you know if I find it for sure. But thank you both for that.
I have a question. It's two parts. And Aimee, I appreciated how you said that Judith Grossman was an early mentor who gave you the encouragement you needed at just the right time. And I'm wondering, first, Kate, if you could name someone who was instrumental to you as an earlier writer in that mentoring aspect. And then I'm also curious, Kate and Aimee, how did your literary orbits come to cross? Since it sounds like
Fun.
there's been such a wonderful partnership in ideas and shared visions going back to those anthologies.
Thanks. That's a neat question, and I was touched too when you mentioned like Judith Grossman and the impact on you, because just somebody saying something that resonates with you at just the right moment that encourages you to follow your likes, your attractions, in storytelling is so amazing, like a real gift.
Yeah.
Um, I can't say that I can't say that I had a mentor or anybody who encouraged me. And I don't think I had that. But what I can say really, mattered to me a whole heck of a lot was that when I was discouraged about some of the things I was doing, because a lot of responses I was getting was like, you're a really talented writer, but you gotta stop doing this fairy tale thing. I got a lot of that. Um, or like we'll publish a story if the horse doesn't show up on the beach at the end and everyone doesn't walk into the sea in their tuxedos and then lightning strike, it's like it was a lot of like take things out that, and of course my dexterity was low and they were probably right in certain ways, but the wring the fairy tales out of it was a lot of what I was getting. And I was in a library working in my early 20s, and I accidentally, just like because I couldn't work, I came across a shelf of fairy tale scholarship, and I had never heard of such a thing. I did not go to school at a time where fairy tales would have been taught or fairy tale scholarship, and I didn't get lucky enough to take any. I don't think there were folklore classes where I was uh, barely a college student. Um, but I stumbled across a shelf of fairy tale scholarship, and I was just like, I became obsessed. And on the shelf was a book by Maria Tatar, who had at that time written a book on Bluebeard and a book on Mesmer. And um, it, it was, I was just so profoundly moved by like the way she wrote about fairy tales. It was like, oh, fairy tales are real. People, and Jack Zipes was there. Anyway, I sent her a card like through her publisher, just saying, I'm so excited. I loved this book and I love fairy tales. It was probably about as mature as that. And she invited me over for coffee and cookies and um, encouraged me and said, basically, just fairy tales need you. Because there aren't a lot of people who, at that time anyway, this was a long time ago, and there still aren't a lot of people who were taking fairy tales seriously then. And that really changed everything that changed my life. And I started to take myself more seriously. It was like the first time I thought, oh, I could. Anyway, it was somehow like through fairy tales being taken seriously and then being just invited into this fairy tale kitchen of this person who was so generous in her books and so generous in being. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. There was a part two of the question, but I don't remember it, but that was
It's how did we meet?
oh
But
my gosh.
no, but I'm trying to
I didn't
remember.
mean to forget that.
It's all right. It's all right. That's such a great
We
story that you had cookies together. So, so good. And
it's just I just like to send cards to people like you, and it wasn't
yeah,
because I was trying to meet her. Like I was sort of
yeah.
mortified. And Jack Zipes did the same thing. So if you ever need company, write to a fairy tale scholar, because
Or just
we
write to
will
a
invite you over
writer.
for cookies. We will invite
So
you over for cookies. Yeah.
totally. And so many writers just like are so happy that someone's, reading their work thoughtfully. My God. But I think, well, and it makes me think too that when I got into UC Irvine, which is where, but like it took some doing to get in. Like I was waitlisted, blah, 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 blah. But then I got the summer reading list and I was very worried. It was the one year Judith Grossman was the head of the program. It was like this little gift that she was, anyway. And the reading list, I was like, oh, I have so many gaps. I'm not going to know anything, but I'm going to try to read up so I can go to my MFA with some knowledge. And anyway, she put the Lang fairy books on there and I like wept. Just remember sitting there in my San Francisco apartment, just crying to be like, what? I love these books. I know these books. Anyway, Kate and I think we met through your first anthology. I think you reached out. I think that would have been it. My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me.
I think I sent an email to your agent inviting you to write a story for it. And I think the first time we met in person was quite a bit later when you
Yeah,
kind of came to read to my
came to
fairy
read.
tale lecture class.
And I was so amazed by your class, like just the things she brings into that class. It's incredible. I teach a fairy tale class too, but it was like mine is so much smaller, and this felt so. You had a GIF. You have a gift, but you also had like a frozen. You had like a little meme. Anyway, it was so good. It was
Oh, I
very.
did. I had the fireplace up on the
You
screen. I
did.
put
It was
the fireplace.
so good.
Because you have to have a distraction when you lecture to a large group. Is so many in this Zoom have read to large, like I have to really conjure up like a different person to do it. It's like it's different
Sasha
things.
Fierce. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's your Beyonce identity. Anyway, but that was
But
great. It was
I first met Aimee through her books. Like I was a big fan, a big reader to answer the question more properly. And then like I when I was collecting the stories for My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me, I sent out invitations expecting to nobody to say yes, and then ended up with 40 like amazing stories, and Penguin just let me do whatever I wanted with that book. Um, this is going on the internet, so I won't say too much about it, but it was really lucky that I had free reign to do what I wanted and to see so many exciting things happen. Your story for both of those anthologies, the stories are so good, Aimee.
it was a thrill. It really was a thrill. I feel very grateful.
And I think I just said like pick a fairy tale if you want to rewrite one or revisit it,
Yeah.
anything. And it was really cool to see what you chose, to do with that. So
It was an incredible assignment, and it was a lot of permission to rewrite something, which I think, or just take a new angle. I had not felt like I could do that before, you know. There's like a huge moon rising. I'm outside and it's beautiful. It's almost a full moon.
All right, so here's a question. I recently watched The Ugly Stepsister. I don't know if you're aware of this film, but it came out last year. It's a Norwegian film, and
Mm,
it's a take on Cinderella. Um, and basically, Cinderella is challenged by her stepsister, who is the ugly stepsister, um, for the prince, etc. Um, I guess what I was it's it's a fairy tale movie, but it's also a horror movie and it's also a comedy. It's all three of them. And so I was thinking, one of my favorite things listening to you read is picking out this small, what I don't know, I don't want to call them small, the or mundane, but like in a ways they are. They're almost like tossed off things that are great. Like the narrator in Kate's story, when we're looking at the long line of girls in black leotards saying, "I never got enough elevation," right? Because we've got this pattern of like 20 girls, and then this other one, and it breaks the pattern, and it also lets us in, to what the narrator's thinking about. It's funny because you're picturing, the last one in line having trouble, making the height. And then, in Amy's story, we've got the line telling Vantala the latest, and she looked ready to knife them both, right? Like all of a sudden, this violence comes in. Um, and so I guess what I'm trying to get at is like sometimes I think of fairy tales as like trance inducing stories or what have you. Um, and then all of a sudden, these little details of humor or violence come in, and like it somehow both ruptures what's happening, but complements it at the same time. Maybe you could talk about how you think that works.
um, I suppose I'm thinking about it as because I know I love hearing them and I know what you mean and I kind of look for them as a reader. And I think some of it is the assurance that it's a person telling you a story and it's not neutrally told. It's not just the sequence of events, which I think often entails the sequence of events is so important, but that there is the flourish that comes from a take or a narrator or, the first person narrator or the third person kind of larger narrator holding it that is allowed an opinion and a judgment and a side and that it warms it up, I think, because you feel the contact with the storyteller.
yeah, the storyteller kind of carries the day, and I think of it as almost like I was thinking That's a really cool question. And actually, just last night, I read a really interesting Adam Phillips piece about Cinderella and about envy and about like the bullying and the trope of the ugliness and the who's inside, who's outside, who's good, who's downtrodden. Anyway, it's a really cool essay that I was reading. So that's a neat that you asked that question. And when it comes to like that sort of admixture, is that a word, of like horror, beauty, terror, sadness. One thing I love in Aimee's work is like how you do it in like a heartbeat, where the greeter's so hopeful to be promoted, just in one sentence you've characterized like who might be like a walk-on cameo in another story with no attribute. There's so much heart there. I think of it as like when you go to like a great modern dance or ballet performance where like the curtain draws, like it could be Pina Bausch, it could be Balanchine. It doesn't matter if it's like experimental or traditional or even ancient, but like everything is going to be in that frame. Like all the pathos, all the humor, all the yearning, and all of like the like that heart, like that your heart's spilling over and you don't even know why you're crying just because the curtain opened and nothing even happened. Everyone's just still, like you sort of want it all. You want to feel everything. Because like we've got so little time to live. Like bring it on. But you have that feeling like it's in a frame. Um, so you're there for the experience and you're there in some kind of like in a safe, I don't like that word exactly, but like you're inside your mind in an encounter that can be funny, sad, and tragic, and different things for different people all at the same time, but everyone's going to kind of be quietly together. Um, I don't know if the equivalent there, like that's not a metaphor that I'm not going to like beat that metaphor into the ground because like I don't know if it's the choreographer or the stager or the conductor. Like I don't know who it is, but I think the storyteller, like there's some hovering over that you're like, I'm here for this experience. Um, like I'm not going to be tricked by it, even if like there's a bit of a joke on me now and then. Um, so like maybe it's like you're not going to have something stuck on your butt if I'm quoting your story correctly, like which did happen to me in junior high. Like people would put signs on me and I didn't know, and that wasn't good. That was probably one of the best things that happened to me, like the nice things. But like when you're at a ballet or you're reading a story by Aimee or any of works by so many here on this Zoom, like you feel like someone's not going to be mean to you when you're reading. Like, I don't know how to
Yeah,
put
like
it.
it's kind of taking care.
Yeah, taking
Yeah,
care, which is
yeah,
a great title of a Joy Williams collection, which
yeah,
is extremely
yeah.
impacted by her love of fairy tales and biblical stories, which also have great power. So
They seem to be dramatically fading into the darkness, but like
I love that.
I just wanted to add, like, there's this moment from The Secret Life of Arrietty, the animated, it's Studio Ghibli, but it's not Miyazaki, but I think he did some production. But there's this moment that I also like to bring into class where Arrietty, the main character, is little. It's based on The Borrowers, and she goes out to think about some issue in her life, and a roly-poly walks by, and she picks it up, and because she's a person, it rolls into a ball, and she throws it up and down twice as a ball, and then she puts it down. And I think most films would then stay with her, but just the same kind of widening narration, he just lingers for a moment on the roly poly, and the roly poly walks over and it's having its own life and its own story, and we're just going to get 2 seconds of it. And another roly poly walks over and they greet each other with their little antenna, and then they walk off together. And it like the worldview is so moving to be like, this is Arietty's story, but we know and acknowledge that there are many other infinite other stories happening of great importance and value. They're not the focus of this film, but they're here, and we're just going to nod to them for a moment. We're just going to see that it's just, there's something about it that I find so morally moving. And I think it's that same sense of like, how do we allow the narration to just nod to the world outside the realm of the story.
Yeah, and the Max Lucchi, who's an amazing Swiss scholar of fairy tales, would have described that as like equilibrium, but it's an ethics. So there's both an aesthetics and an ethics to fairy tales where nothing matters more than anything else, and everything matters and is almost but not quite going to have its whole story told or something. Yeah, that's really cool example. I love The Secret Life of Arrietty. Yeah.
Oh,
And I
incredible.
haven't seen The Ugly Stepsisters, so now it's on my list, but it
Same,
made me
same.
wonder if it has anything in common with Black Swan or like where I'm going to place it or with Catherine Breillat's films, but
I know. I got to see it. It's a great tip. It's a great question.
I have a question, and if maybe it's the closing question, or but if someone does have another inquiry they'd like to ask, please feel free to jump in after this round. But Kate, I noticed that you had a lot of the balletic components with the jetés, and last semester when I was teaching creative writing, I worked with my poets. I gave them external mediums, and they wrote poems either inspired by paintings or classical music compositions. So for both Aimee and Kate, do you have any go-to musical compositions or paintings or sculptures that help get you into that writing mood? And not necessarily from an ekphrastic standpoint, but maybe it's just something you write to in the background, or if there's a painting on your screensaver or a sculpture that's it constantly just sort of stokes that creative fire.
Do you have one? I feel like that's constant. I really do feel like it's hilarious that I'm becoming just like a teeth. It's like, but um, it's always changing. I feel like that's part of the joy of writing is that you're always fed by all the things in your world, all the relationships, all the news, all the art, all the internal strife. It's just all, going to show up in the work in some way. And so yeah, I think it changes, which means it would be helpful if I had one that I could throw out here in the moment. But maybe I read this book, John and Paul, A Love Story in the fall. It's about all the Beatles songs and like how they relate to their relationship. And then you listen to the Beatles songs all new because he talks about them in such a compelling way. I just loved it, but that's felt like it's just made me so in awe of the creative process all over again. And that's been incredibly just fortifying.
you're like becoming the oracle. You're like the oracle, or like you're like the good version of the voice in Alphaville who's like coming out of the fan in the wall, but like you're like the opposite. You're like telling us really good things. Yeah, I just watched Alphaville for like the 100th time, so that might answer your question, John. But um, a friend of mine once, gave me a book of like curiosity shops. It was like photographs of really unusual and not antique stores, but like curiosity shops around the world that were kind of um, like they could be anywhere from junk stores to really exquisite arcane things. And she was just like, oh, write from these for a while, like describe the rooms. If you need a room in your novel, just pick a page. Um, and I love doing things like that, and whether they come to something or not. But for the book that I just finished, two of the characters are dance obsessed, and I was a dance obsessed teen. And so there was just a lot of watching ballet and documentaries and old classes and MTV videos and relearning the choreo from that I learned in the 1980s in private this time around. Um, so I do a lot of like immersive things just to because we're writers. I'm so jealous of people who are in bands and they get to pick up a new instrument, or they're painters and they get to work with like oil instead of watercolors. We have like words. So I try to bring a lot else into it, just into my life. I don't try to, actually. That was really disingenuous. I just do. But I'm a person who will like listen to one song and repeat for for months on end. It like becomes like like the mood of whatever I'm trying to sort through. And so I can tell you one song, which is Black Swan by Tom York, just over and over and over, which might tell you something about my mood for the last 10 months if you've ever listened to that song. But I don't know where it comes into play, but certainly like it's like I develop a like probably a parasocial relationship with a whole lot of artists dead and alive through that operation. But I don't work with the music on. And I don't consider, I guess it's research, but it's almost more like method writing. It's like just living. It's like experience. I just want to experience things because I hope to bring that to the page. It's like not like something I'm trying to do. It just has to be, I guess. But sorry, I just prattled on there, but it's a really good you ask really good questions, all of you. And Aimee, you're just like glowing. You have a halo now.
I know I'm in
I
sorry
love
about
it.
this. It's easier to be outside, but then I ended up
I feel so pedestrian, like
in the dark.
in comparison, but
I just had my Zoom options limited. So, this is where I ended up. But it is a good question. And it's, I think there was someone posting about just how culture is, we fight fascism, not just to fight fascism, but also because we want a culturally rich world to live in and think about all kinds of things. And so it just feels like we need as much as we possibly can find and have.
yeah, you want to encounter the other, like in a good other,
Yeah. Yeah. Expand our world all the time. Yeah.
And that is a wonderful note to wrap up our conversation. And once more, applause for our readers this evening. Thank you, Aimee, Kate, all of you for coming. And I love that this question and answer session turned into a fairy tale masterclass. And this is how orbits converge in the writing world. It was perfect.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and just wonderful to be here and great questions. And Kate, such a joy.
Such a joy. And thank you for all that you do with your charitable work, with When We Critique and all. I mean, it's just astounding what you do and the resources that you provide. It's amazing. And so thank you for giving us the chance to like be part of that. It was a real honor to read with Aimee and to be here with all of you this evening.
Yeah, same here.